March 26, 1967, Easter Sunday, the Cameron Highlands, Malaysia. Jim Thompson stepped out of a cottage and walked down a gravel path toward the road. It was just after 3 p.m. He left behind his cigarettes, his lighter, and the medication he took for gallstone pain. His friends assumed he was taking a short walk. He would be back soon, they thought. He was never seen again. Let's go back to the beginning and examine what happened to the man they called the Thai Silk King. Jim Thompson had come a long way since his childhood in Greenville, Delaware. Born James Harrison Wilson Thompson on March 21, 1906, he was the youngest of 5 children. His maternal grandfather, James Harrison Wilson, became an Army Major General at the age of 27. His father was president of the United States Finishing Company, which printed cottons in mass production. Thompson came from a successful family with high expectations. From 1931 to 1940, Thompson worked as a practicing architect. But there was a problem. He failed to pass the New York Architectural Board exams. It was a setback, but bigger changes were coming. Thompson joined the U.S. Army at the beginning of World War II. At the urging of Captain Edwin Black, he became a member of the newly formed Office of Strategic Services, known as the OSS. This was a forerunner of what would later become the Central Intelligence Agency. In 1945, Thompson began training for several weeks in the jungles of what is now Sri Lanka. He was preparing for the liberation of Thailand from Japanese control. As he and his comrades were flying to Thailand, word reached them that Japan had surrendered. The plane continued on to Bangkok anyway. Thompson took on the role of OSS station chief. He also set up a temporary American consulate until a permanent one could be established. After being discharged from the Army in 1946, Thompson made a decision that would change his life. He decided to stay in Thailand. He had fallen in love with the country and its people. It didn't take long for Thompson to discover his true calling in life. The northeast region of Thailand produced some raw silk, but there was a problem. Competition from cheaper, machine-made fabrics produced in Europe and Japan had significantly diminished the demand for Thailand's raw silk. Thompson saw potential in the tiny industry, which was on the verge of extinction. He took samples to designers, decorators, and fashion editors in New York. They raved about the product. The quality was exceptional. Then Thompson hired 200 silk weavers in Thailand to create finished products from raw silk and dyes. The brightly colored, hand-woven silk began to gain popularity. Silk shops started springing up around Bangkok. By 1965, there were 156 of them. The growing Thai silk industry began garnering international attention. Media coverage appeared in Reader's Digest, Time, Life, Newsweek, and the New York Times. Fashion designers such as Balmain started using the material. Even the cast of the musical The King and I wore Thai silk that Thompson had developed. By 1958, the industry had expanded dramatically. Thompson's Thai Silk Company was selling its products to more than 17 countries. The numbers tell the story. Sales had grown from $36,000 in 1948 to $650,000 in 1957. By 1967, national and international sales had reached $1.5 million. The number of Thais earning their living from silk weaving rose from just a few in 1945 to 20,000 by 1967. Along the way, Thompson became known as the Thai Silk King. Thompson had also assembled an enviable art collection and built a home that still stands today as a landmark in Bangkok. He seamlessly wove together 6 traditional Thai teak houses into one, placing them on stilts to protect his home from storms and flooding. He was a soft-spoken man of medium height with blue eyes. He was also a heavy smoker who worked incredibly hard for his success. He would wake up early to visit silk weavers and often didn't get to sleep until 11 p.m. or midnight. This eligible bachelor's personal fortune was estimated to be worth about $1 million. The first few months of 1967 were particularly busy for Thompson. On March 17, 1967, the new two-story building that was to house his silk business in Bangkok finally had its grand opening. A few days later, Thompson celebrated his 61st birthday with friends on March 21st. Then he packed his bags and boarded a flight to Malaysia on March 23rd. He had accepted an invitation from friends Dr. T.G. and Helen Ling to visit the Cameron Highlands. The Cameron Highlands was a pretty resort area located more than 5,000 feet above sea level, about 140 miles north of Kuala Lumpur. It was surrounded by wild jungle terrain and deep, hidden ravines. The Lings lived in Singapore. Dr. Ling was Chinese and his American wife ran her own antique store. It would be a short visit. On Easter Monday, Thompson was planning to go to Singapore to attend business meetings with an American businessman who was considering starting a fabric industry there and wanted advice. He was scheduled to dine with the businessman and the American ambassador that evening. Thompson was traveling to the Cameron Highlands with Connie Mengskow, a half-English, half-Thai friend whom he'd met in 1945 when he worked for the Army, and she was an interpreter for Allied forces. When they arrived at Bangkok Airport to fly to Penang, Thompson realized he'd made a mistake. He had failed to get his cholera shot, which was required to enter Malaysia. He also hadn't brought a Thai tax clearance certificate. Fortunately, a health official at the airport agreed to give him the cholera shot and backdate the certificate to meet Malaysia's 6-day requirement. For her part, Mengskow signed a form promising to pay any outstanding taxes that Thompson owed should he fail to return home from the trip. When Thompson and Mengskow arrived in Penang, they stayed overnight in Georgetown, the island's main city. The day of their arrival, they checked into the Ambassador Hotel and hired a taxi to take them on a sightseeing tour around the island. They returned to the hotel afterwards in time for Thompson to get a haircut. It was another task he'd neglected to do in the busy months leading up to this trip. Thompson and his traveling companion met for cocktails, went out for supper at an Indian restaurant, and took a walk. The following morning, they went shopping. The taxi they had hired to drive them to the Highlands picked them up just after 11 a.m. On their way to take the ferry to the mainland, something strange happened. The taxi driver stopped his vehicle without warning and jumped out. He ran into a nearby building and emerged 5 minutes later with another man. The driver explained that this new man would be their driver instead. It was an unexpected stop, a minor inconvenience that Thompson and Mengskow tolerated without much complaint. When they reached the town of Tapa, their driver asked them to change taxis again. He explained that the road climbed steeply to the resort and his car had developed engine trouble. It wouldn't be able to make the steep climb, he said. Mengskow complained when she realized the second taxi already had 2 Chinese passengers inside. She and Thompson had paid for a private car, not a shared taxi that would be cramped with 5 people. The driver of the second taxi agreed with her complaint. The other passengers removed their bags and Mengskow and Thompson completed their trip in relative comfort. They arrived at the Ling's Moonlight Cottage at about 5:30 p.m. on Good Friday. The cottage was a semi-Tudor bungalow that sat on a hill surrounded by thick jungle. A covered veranda just off the living room had a gravel path that led along the lawn and down a narrow, twisting road to a golf course. The 3-bedroom house had a large garden around 3 sides. It was located in Tanah Rata, which had more of an English feel than a Malaysian one. The town had neat bungalows, hotels, a golf course, and an Anglican church carved from the jungle. Dr. Ling was waiting for Thompson and Mengskow when they arrived. His wife arrived several hours later, after completing some business that had delayed her. Thompson woke up the next morning feeling well-rested. After breakfast, he and Dr. Ling decided to try a new trail that led to the golf course. They agreed to meet the women at the club at 11 a.m. When Mengskow and Mrs. Ling arrived at the appointed hour, however, the men were nowhere to be found. What had happened? Soon after Dr. Ling and Thompson began walking along the trail, they got lost amid the tangled brush coming down the hill. Dr. Ling then tripped on a root and injured himself. They finally found their way to the golf course just before 1 p.m., After Thompson discovered a small stream, and they followed it until they reached a familiar spot. After having a drink at the club, the foursome drove home for lunch. On Easter Sunday, March the 26th, 1967, Thompson decided to walk down to the bottom of the hill from the cottage as the others prepared to attend services at the Anglican Church in Tarentum. He met the rest of the group near the golf course about 15 minutes later. When the church service ended, they all went back to the Moonlight Cottage to pick up a picnic basket. Then they headed to a site at Mount Breenchong, about 45 minutes away. They spread a blanket on the grass and ate from the hamper and thermos. But Thompson appeared to be in a hurry. As soon as they'd finished eating, he started putting things back in the picnic hamper. Everyone returned to the cottage at about 2:30 p.m. and went to their respective rooms for a nap. As Mangskow and the Lings went off to their rooms, Thompson stayed in the living room. The Lings left their bedroom window open to allow air to circulate. They heard their restless house guest move an aluminum deck chair onto the veranda. Just after 3 p.m., they heard footsteps crunching on the gravel, leading down the path to the road. They assumed Thompson was taking a walk. Nothing unusual about that. When Mangskow emerged from her room at 4:30 p.m., Dr. Ling was reading in the living room. Thompson's suit jacket was slung over the back of a chair on the veranda. But here's what was strange. He'd left his cigarettes and lighter behind. He'd also left the medication he took to deal with pain from gallstone attacks. For a heavy smoker who relied on that medication, this was unusual. Everyone assumed Thompson would be back shortly. Tea was served at 5 p.m. There was still no sign of him by 6 p.m. Dr. Ling wondered if Thompson had walked down to the golf course, so he drove over there to check. Dr. Ling returned alone 15 minutes later. Thompson was not there. Nobody had seen him there or on the road that afternoon. The jungle in the highlands was difficult enough to navigate by day. When darkness fell, the sky turned into an inky black and the temperature dropped noticeably. By 7:30 p.m. that Easter Sunday, the Lings and Mangskow were genuinely worried. They called friends, but none of them had seen or heard from Thompson. Dr. Ling reported Thompson's disappearance to the police in Tarentum. The police said there was little they could do until sunrise. They would launch a full-scale search in the morning if he hadn't returned. The Lings speculated that perhaps Thompson had stumbled and lost his bearings in the darkness, or maybe he'd injured himself. A friend and British Army major, whose Cocker Spaniel had some training for hunting, arrived to help with the search. They first walked to a hornet's nest that Thompson was known to have visited twice before. It was a 45-minute walk in daylight, but took much longer under the cover of darkness. The searchers returned at midnight, having found no trace of Thompson. After resting briefly, the two men went out and searched for several hours in a different direction. The local police launched an official search about 15 hours after Thompson was last seen. By the end of the first day, nearly 100 people were involved in looking for the Thai Silk King. This included the local police, a group of British soldiers on leave in the Highlands, and guests from local hotels. Everyone was aware that the first day was crucial for finding Thompson and maximizing his safety. But the tangled jungle terrain made the situation incredibly difficult. No one knew which direction Thompson had gone. Searchers kept their eyes peeled for signs that someone had used the trails. They looked for flattened grass, broken branches, or bits of clothing. In an effort to retrace Thompson's steps and establish his movements, police asked villagers if anyone had seen the missing man around 3:30 p.m. on Easter Sunday. A Malay cook working at a Lutheran mission cottage near Moonlight Cottage came forward with information. She said she was in the mission's kitchen at about 4 p.m. when she saw a man resembling Thompson walk up the road, look at the garden, and retrace his steps. By Tuesday, the search had expanded dramatically. More than 300 policemen were involved, along with about 30 Aboriginal guides who lived in the jungle and knew its trails well. Soldiers joined the effort, as did hotel guests who'd helped on the first day. Even pupils from the Dalat American School for Children of American missionaries from throughout Southeast Asia participated. In all, more than 400 people took part in the search. Due to the efforts of some of Thompson's influential friends, Several helicopters were sent to help look for him during the first week. Their usefulness was limited, however. The thick jungle often prevented crews from seeing the ground. On the second day of the search, a man who was a well-known bomo, or witch doctor, arrived and offered to use his powers to help. Almost every village in Malaysia has a bomo who can be consulted on a range of problems, from impotency to missing persons. While the bomo was in a trance, he announced that some evil spirits were holding Thompson in the jungle. The next day, the bomo said Thompson was alive and well and being held under a tree. He pinpointed the spot on a map. The searchers went to look but found no sign of Thompson. Undeterred, the bomo claimed that the spirits had moved him. He would return on his own by 9 a.m. the following morning, the bomo said. Wednesday came and went with no sign of the missing man. Searchers initially thought Thompson was lost or injured, and that they would find clues to his whereabouts on the first day after he'd vanished. When they didn't, a new theory emerged by Wednesday or Thursday. Perhaps he'd been kidnapped for ransom. This practice was fairly common at the time in Malaysia, particularly with victims who were Singapore Chinese. However, Europeans were not generally kidnapped. After the third day, searchers found no evidence that Thompson had actually gone into the jungle. Police concluded after 5 days that there was little hope Thompson was still alive, if he was indeed in the jungle. Then a new lead emerged. A garage attendant claimed that on the day Thompson disappeared, he'd seen a convoy of 5 cars bearing Thai license plates driving up the road to the highlands at 3:30 p.m. They returned at about 5:30 p.m., he said. This led to speculation that they were somehow involved in Thompson's disappearance. After investigating the story, the Malaysian Criminal Intelligence Division concluded that it never happened. According to border authorities, no Thai vehicles had entered the country. The Malaysian CID next turned its attention to Mang Scow's story about her and Thompson switching drivers on the way to the highlands. Had this been a foiled attempt to kidnap the Thai Silk King? Officials learned that the first driver didn't have a Malaysian license, so he'd found a friend who did. As for the second change, drivers coming from Penang often transferred passengers at Tapa to save on gas as well as wear and tear on their car. What may have appeared to be an unusual situation was, in fact, a common practice. On the second day of the search for Thompson, his company announced plans to offer a reward of $10,000 for information leading to his whereabouts. Over the following weeks, his friends increased the amount to $25,000, including $10,000 for proof of his death if he'd come to an untimely end. The Lings were subsequently subjected to hoaxes by people trying to extort money. The day after the initial reward was posted, a man phoned Dr. Ling at his Singapore apartment and said he had information about Thompson. He told Ling that Thompson was being held in a house near Tapa. If Ling came with him, they could arrange for a ransom. But the gentleman said he needed money to get there. Ling gave him 50 Malaysian dollars and said 2 friends would meet him instead. The man failed to show up at the appointed time and place. More Bomos came to visit Moonlight Cottage, but the areas they suggested for Thompson's location were searched with no results. Police called off the official search after 10 days, having tried to locate Thompson within a 70-mile area of the cottage where he was last seen. But small groups of police continued going into the jungle whenever new leads arose. Local authorities estimated that it would take a full regiment of men working for about a month to comb the entire area. Desperate for leads on her brother's whereabouts, Thompson's sister hired Dutch-born mystic Peter Herkos. He sat on the veranda of Moonlight Cottage and claimed that Thompson had been kidnapped by 14 men and brought to Cambodia for political motives. It was a sensational claim, but there was no evidence to support it. Richard Noon was a British officer working with the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, known as SEATO, as a planning officer. He developed contacts among local Aboriginal people after searching years earlier for information about the fate of his late brother Pat. Noon was brought into the investigation as a more credible source to help with the search. He walked into the jungle and, after speaking with Aboriginal people, emerged 36 hours later. He said he was convinced Thompson was not in the jungle, As time marched on without any trace of Thompson, the theories about his disappearance grew from the mundane to the outlandish. It was initially believed he'd been the victim of an accident or was lost in the jungle. Then people began suggesting he'd been kidnapped for ransom. Another theory suggested a tiger had eaten him, but no remains were ever found. Then came the conspiracy theorists. They suggested that the former intelligence officer had been kidnapped as part of a political plot, perhaps by communist guerrillas. However, no one ever stepped forward to claim what was considered to be a sizable reward at the time. And that's the strange part. If someone had kidnapped Thompson for ransom or political reasons, why didn't they ever make contact? Why didn't they demand money or make political statements? In 1974, Jim Thompson was officially declared dead. All that remains of the man who revived Thailand's silk industry in the 1950s is his Bangkok home, which lives on as a museum today. But the question remains, what happened to Jim Thompson on that Easter Sunday in 1967? Did he wander into the jungle and get lost? Did he suffer a medical emergency and collapse somewhere in the dense vegetation where searchers couldn't find him? Was he kidnapped by someone who then panicked and killed him? Was it a political assassination carried out so perfectly that no trace was ever left behind? Or is there another explanation entirely, something we haven't even considered? The truth is, we don't know. Despite one of the most extensive searches in Malaysian history, despite the involvement of hundreds of people, despite psychics and witch doctors and intelligence officers, no credible clue ever emerged. Jim Thompson simply vanished. To this day, the disappearance of Jim Thompson remains one of Southeast Asia's greatest unsolved mysteries. A successful American businessman who brought an entire industry back from the brink of extinction, only to disappear without a trace in the Malaysian jungle. If you have any theories about what might have happened, leave them in the comments below. And if you want to hear more unsolved cases like this one, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.